Today we have members of the General Assembly, we have business leaders, we have civil society leaders, we have a small group of veterans over here, we have some donors and staff, so thank you all for coming on short notice. I'm going to introduce our sponsors in just a second, who allow you to have a fee-free experience today. But first I want to tell you how this event came to pass. I was at a national convention in Denver at our centers. By the way, I'm Mike Stenhouse, Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity. I did not presume that you knew who I was, I just forgot. So I'm at our national conference in Denver, 2014. And Arthur Brooks is in the gym. I get up early, do a little workout, and I introduce myself, and I say, you know, if you're ever in Rhode Island, we'd love to put an event together with you. As well, the person you have to talk to about that is my assistant, Rachel. She's over there on the treadmill. So here's Rachel. I gave her my card that day on the treadmill, and I said, hey, if Arthur's ever in Rhode Island, let us know. So she calls me about 10 days ago. Arthur's going to be in Rhode Island. I said, gee, thanks for the notice. That's great. But yeah, we can work something out. So you all responded. We filled up the room. Thank you very much. So thank you, Rachel, for that. And she kept my card for 4 years. All right, so our sponsors today, I want to thank them. They all stepped forward because we knew we weren't going to be able to sell anything in a week. We figured the only way to Rhode Island was if we invite you for free. That's the only way. So I needed sponsors to allow us to do that. And right away, we stepped up. So not here today is Mr. Warren Galkin. Many of you know Warren. He's sponsored. Coming soon, we hear he's on his way, is former ambassador, United States Ambassador and board member of the Heritage Foundation, Ambassador J. William Middendorf is a sponsor, will be here shortly. Our Center's Chairman, Mike Riley, is a sponsor. Our Center's Vice Chairman, Phil Cody, where are you, Phil, is a sponsor. Mr. Scott Morrison is a sponsor today. Mr. Mike Collins is a sponsor. And Chris Hurd. Chris, where are you, Chris? Chris is a sponsor. Thank you, guys. If you need restrooms, out right past the elevators all the way down the hall. Also, if you want to tweet, you know, we're making it known, we might as well be modern. We've got a hashtag. Hashtag BrooksRI. So if you want to take pictures and tweet, just use that hashtag. I guess even us old dogs that'll learn how to do this new trick. All right, as I have stated many times publicly, you know, I think we're at a dangerous crossroads in our American democracy. While we encourage and understand there should be disagreement on a lot of specific issues, it's always been our center's position that those disagreements should happen in an open and honest and non-personal, rigorous public debate. But in our society today, there are many we call the enemies of debate who just want to shut down opposing views. Whether it's college campuses or whether it's on social media or a lot of places. Our guest today in a recent Wall Street Journal opinion piece said that what worries him the most is that the competition of ideas is under attack. Many would rather shut down debate than participate in it. Politicians from both parties try to discredit their opponents with name-calling and ad hominem attacks. Too many college campuses, people with the wrong viewpoints and ideas are unwelcome. Much of the mass media has become polarized, meaning readers and viewers on the right and the left are never challenged in their conviction that the other side is made up of knaves and fools. And I think that's true. In our Center's view, it's been this single-minded thinking that we believe is why our state ranks so poorly in so many national indexes. In front of you today is one of those indexes that our Center is working with, the Family Prosperity Index. Rhode Island, we just, in data that's about to come out, we will drop from 45th to 46th in the nation. when you look at, well, we need, you know, when you look at economic, social, cultural factors, we need new ideas, but yet I can tell you from experience, ideas from our center are often, you know, laughed at or rejected because we're not part of that single-minded mindset right now. And I think that's dangerous for debate. We're bottom 10 in occupational licensing, business climate, family prosperity. We're also in the bottom third in entrepreneurship, which is the subject of our speech today. And if you look on the back here, you'll see that ranking in red on the entrepreneurship factor. And that's what our Family Prosperity Initiative is all about. Is trying to get people to work with each other across the philosophical divide so we can really help families be more prosperous. Our guest speaker's speech today is about entrepreneurism. And I've had the pleasure of hearing authors speak before, and I can tell you you're in for a treat. We will have questions and answers afterwards, so think up where you want to go with Arthur. He is an author of books. He's an academic. He's written academic journals, national opinion pieces. He's a classical musician, a PhD professor of economics. He is well known for his bipartisan work to try to help alleviate poverty in America by engaging in those really difficult discussions that we all have to face, I think, today in our society. In fact, just last year they published a landmark research called The Success Sequence from his institute, which basically says graduate high school, work, get married, then have children. That puts you on such a better path to prosperity than if you miss any one of those sequences. I don't know if we should be happy, probably happy for him, but sad as a nation. Just last week, Arthur announced that next year he will step down as president of the American Enterprise Institute. After 10 years at the helm, he believes that fresh ideas and leadership is required, so consistent with his beliefs. He's one of America's most innovative thinkers and popular speakers. So on behalf of the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity Board and staff, I ask you to extend a warm welcome. Now that's warmer, not cooler. I'm so pleased to introduce you to Mr. Arthur Brooks.
Thanks to all of you. What a delight it is to be here on behalf of Rachel Manfredi, my colleague, and all of my colleagues at the American Enterprise Institute. Warm greetings from Washington, D.C., where we live, so you don't have to. I want to start by saying thank you not just for inviting me here today. I also want to thank you for your involvement with the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity, for supporting the work of Mike Stenhouse and his incredible colleagues. Why do I thank you for that? Because you are the solutions that we're looking for in Washington, D.C. This is not a country that's top-down from federal to state, it's quite the contrary. And we need innovative thinking around free enterprise principles at the state level that will filter up to what we see in Washington, D.C. And I can tell you that what's going on with this center is well-respected and well-received, and we see the good that you're doing. With the indices that we talked about, but just the ongoing spirit here in this Capitol of trying to make this state better. And so a special thank you to those of you who are donors to the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity. At AEI, my role as president, I spent a lot of my time on the road fundraising. We have to raise $50 million a year for my institute. It's a lot of work. But I tell you, there's nothing that brings greater joy than connecting our principles to those who are donors to my institution. And I know it's also true for those of you that are supporting this great center. Thank you for doing that. It's a visionary thing to do. It's a wise investment. And I recommend it to you, if you're not giving now, to get involved philanthropically with the center. It's a great investment for you and for our country. I want to talk to you today about the American dream. Why? Because I study success. I was a professor at Syracuse for a long time. I've written a lot of books about success in business, success in life. I write about happiness. And in my job, the most interesting thing is I meet the most successful people in the world, and I ask them to tell me their story. And I get these incredible stories. And I want to tell you one recently that kind of gave me an epiphany, and it sent me in search of an answer to another question I'm going to give you here in a second. So I was talking to a guy who's one of the richest men in America. And I said, in your own words, tell me how you became so wealthy. He said, oh, it's very simple. It starts when I was 12. And I'm thinking, oh, it's going to be all day. But he said, see, he grew up in Wichita, Kansas, and he said that he was at the edge of town one day when he was 12 years old, and there was an apple orchard, and he was standing up next to the fence of the apple orchard. He was looking up into a tree. It was August, and it was full of big, red, juicy, beautiful apples. And the farmer came up on the other side of the fence and he said, hey kid, you like those apples? And I said, yeah. He said, you want one? I said, yeah. He said, I'll give it to you for a nickel. He said, I had a nickel in my pocket. My dad had just given me my allowance, kind of a cheapskate, but it was a nickel. And the farmer wanted a nickel, so I gave it to him, and he gave me an apple. And I was shining it up on my shirt, walking into town, and here's the funny thing. A businessman comes walking up to me and he said, hey kid, that's a great looking apple, I'll give you a dime for it. And I thought, that's 100% profit margin. And a business was born. I took my dime back to the edge of town, I got 2 apples, and I came back and got 20 cents. And by the end of the week, I was running back and forth, doubling my money every day, and selling them downtown. By the end of the month, I was taking my bike out there and getting boxes of apples. And a couple of years later, when I got my driver's license, I borrowed my uncle's truck, and I was bringing in truckloads of apples. And this is what I was doing, doubling my money. And this went on for week after week. This is my story of success, month after month, year after year. And then my father died and left me $100 million. So that got me to thinking, you know, if I'm a student of the American dream, and my ethical job is explaining it to other Americans who don't quite believe it, it sounds too often like that's the real story of rich people in this country. Now, that's especially true now. I've looked at the public opinion polling, and so do you. We have an alarming level of skepticism about free enterprise's ability to let people at the margins earn their success. Unprecedented levels of skepticism about capitalism. It's a crisis, actually. Why? When you talk to people, they think all the rich guys are like my friend. They talk a big game about how capitalism lifted them up. But in the end, it was some inside job. So I was thinking about that, and I thought, you know what? My stories are all wrong. My stories are all wrong. I'm telling these rags to riches stories, which are actually middle class to riches stories. What I need is the true essence of American entrepreneurship, which is not the middle to the top. It's the bottom to the middle. Because that's the reason that everybody in this room, that your ancestors strived to get you where you are. What do I love about this country? You know, I look around this room and you all have different stories. You all have different paths to where you are today. And some of you are 3 generations away from scratching out potatoes in Ireland, and some were running away from a pogrom, and some of your ancestors were brought here involuntarily. But let me tell you what we all have in common. We descend from ambitious riffraff, and we're proud of it. That's America. So we need to tell the American story of coming up from nothing. I've been telling the wrong stories, and my wrong stories are adding to the problem of skepticism and cynicism in this country about the capitalist system. So I've been thinking about this, and this has been going on in my head for a couple of years. And I want to tell you how I solved that problem. I want to offer it to you today. Okay, so a year ago or so, when I was thinking about trying to find a better way to tell the story of true American success, I was doing some research. I was actually making a movie, a documentary film that will be coming out later this year about the promises, the moral promises of capitalism. And to do that, I was looking at these great organizations around America that had extraordinary success with the most marginalized people in our society. Okay? So I'm looking for the people that are not just kind of unloved. I'm looking for people that are considered unlovable. Right? 'Cause that's really the measure of moral leadership, is not just loving the unloved, it's loving the unlovable, isn't it? I mean, that's what our hearts should be made of. And so I'm thinking, who are the most unlovable people at the true periphery of our society today? You know who they are? People who've been in prison. See, and what I want to do is I want to take a quick side note here and recommend to all of you that you be worried about something with me that I'm really worried about, which is criminal justice reform in America. You one of the things that we know is that this year 600,000 people will come out of prisons in the United States. That's 23 million in the whole stock of former prisoners in this country. It's a lot of people, right? That's the whole population of Taiwan, right? Now, here are two things you need to know about people who've been in prison in America today. They have a 70% unemployment rate, and they have a 50% likelihood of returning to prison within 24 months. That's a huge crisis for the country. That's a crisis for them, and for their families, and for their communities, and for academics. We need to solve that. Who can solve that? Can progressives solve that? No. They've been talking about that for generations. The only people who can solve that are you and me. People who have our free enterprise values. Why? Because what's really missing in the lives of people who've been in prison is jobs and earned success and the sense of one's own dignity and limitless potential. And that's the conservative movement. That's why we got into it in the first place, is this sense of progress and unlimited potential for all people. Okay, so this is what I'm looking at to make this film. This is what's on my mind. And I find this program that tries to solve this problem in Houston, Texas. It's called the Prison Entrepreneurship Program. Pretty self-explanatory, right? It says basically this, look, 70% unemployment rate, why? Because guys get out of prison and they can't get a job. You go and you fill out applications. Have you been in prison? Yes, like, I don't need it. I don't need it. Okay, so the idea is, the problem is too many guys can't find jobs. So let's give them entrepreneurship training and they'll make their own jobs. Brilliant. Again, very conservative thinking. American conservative thinking. That was your grandparents were thinking like that. Like, can't get ahead, just got off the boat, I'm going to do it my way. Okay, so what do? They go into the Texas penitentiary system and they sign up 2,500 guys a year. They find guys that they think have potential and guys who are really interested, and what do? For a year before they get out of prison, this 1 year before their release date, they go through classes in business planning and how business models work and basic finance. And I was there for their elevator pitch competition where they have to talk about their business. It's phenomenal. I mean, these are startup businesses that, it's not like large molecule biotech firms and software startups. This is stuff like landscaping companies and barbecue joints, real things that these guys can imagine. And it's impressive. It's actually inspirational. But here's the reason I was there. I had the data on these guys. 50% likelihood of going back to prison within 24 months for the prison population in Texas in general. For the guys that have gone through this program, 7%. They're 1/7 as likely to be reincarcerated as the general population. They're doing something really, really right. I went there to find out, and I met a bunch of the guys. Now here's the funny thing. When you talk to them, they never talk about their businesses. They talk about their lives. So, and here's the weirder thing. I asked, how many of these guys who come out of your program actually start their businesses and succeed? I think it's going to be like 90% or something, right? I mean, a 7% reincarceration rate, that's got to correlate into lots of new businesses. Here's the interesting thing. It's actually only 16% start their businesses. 84% don't. They use the entrepreneurial skills they got in their last year of prison, and they use those in the job market and get ordinary jobs just like you and I have, and they succeed. And then when you talk to them, they don't talk about their business plans. They talk about their entrepreneurial approach to their lives. They talk about re-engaging for the first time in the lives of their children, and marrying the women who are the mothers of their children, and going to jobs that they're not quite sure about that seem really boring, but continuing to go again and again and again. See, this is the entrepreneurial approach. So here, my friends, is the epiphany. Remember, I'm looking for better stories about ordinary people to solve our cynicism problem in America today. And here it is. Here's where the scales fell from my eyes. I went to Houston to look for the secret to startup businesses. And what I found were the secrets to startup lives. Entrepreneurship in America is not about money, and it's not about business startups. It's about how you see your life and whether or not you believe that you're in control, whether or not you have inherent optimism. Now, I got so charged up by this. I'm making movies with these guys. I mean, it's amazing. This guy was, he was running drugs back and forth across the border. Went to prison for a long time. Didn't see his daughter for years and years and years. And then he gets out and he's running this little landscaping business, and he talks about what it's like to be married and go to his work and to see his daughter every day when he comes home. And he talks about it the same way that somebody would talk about a business, of a startup business that they fostered with love and care. It's a very inspirational thing, I have to tell you. And I got so interested in it, I got to know these guys, I started asking the secrets in their view. I'm writing a book on this, about the startup life. Here's what I found. These secrets are not just the secrets if you're a convict and in prison and poor. It turns out the secrets that they taught me are the secrets to give me a better life too. This is the promise of America, is that the rich can learn from the poor. All of us can learn from each other. It's the radical solidarity that comes from true brotherhood, that goes across class, and it goes across race, and it goes across language and everything else. These guys were telling me their secrets, and I was getting happier and feeling better about my own life too. And I want to give you 2 of these secrets, because I'm so sure that these are good, that if you follow these 2 secrets, you're going to be happier by evening today. Now realize that this lunch is free, but it's your money back on this guarantee about the secrets I'm about to tell you. These are the secrets to the startup life. Secret number 1, take more risk. Now it seems like a weird piece of advice when you're talking to guys who've been in prison, because they're astonishingly forthcoming with you and you ask them why they went to prison, and it's always some idiotic risk. Like this one guy says, well, yeah, I robbed the liquor store downstairs from my house. Too much risk, right? And, or they'll, one guy, he bought drugs from an undercover cop who is the same guy 3 times in a row. And you think, you need to take less risk. It turns out that's exactly wrong. That's exactly wrong. And let me tell you why. And to tell you why, I want to tell you about a pretty important piece of new economic research that I've been thinking about recently. Many of you know who the economist Stephen Levitt is. He's one of the country's leading economists. He's at the University of Chicago. He wrote Freakonomics, by the way. You know that book. And that book sold 3 or 4 million copies, and it was a big deal. Why is Stephen Levitt a great economist? Not because he has better technical ways to solve problems, but because he asks better questions than most economists. The secret to success, generally, is better questions, not better answers. Okay, now, in most jobs, as a matter of fact. So, Steve Levitt is always asking these interesting questions about people's lives. A year ago, he wrote a paper, and that paper is available now, and the paper asks this very simple question. How do people answer the hardest questions in their lives? When they're really worried about a decision, how do they make their toughest decisions? Okay, when you think about it, all of you have faced, consistently throughout your lives, certain junctures in which you had to make a yes or no decision. Where no was the status quo, and yes was something scary, and you didn't know what to do. Should I marry that guy? Should I quit my job and go to law school? Should I go to this college or that college? It happens consistently throughout our lives. It happens less and less as you get older, but people do face it at every stage in life. Should I get my knee fixed or not? Where yes is scary, no is the status quo, and you just can't decide. Agonizing decision. Too hard to decide. Okay, so Stephen Levitt says, what do we do when we have those decisions? Do we tend to say no too much, or do we tend to say yes too much? Are we too conservative, or are we too risky? Okay, but here's how he answers the question. He puts out an advertisement saying, do you have an impossible decision you're trying to make? Let me make it for you with the flip of a coin. Okay, 22,000 people signed up for the experiment. This is such a great country. I mean, it's like, I can't decide whether or not to propose to my girlfriend, so I'm going to let an economist at the University of Chicago make the decision, and I flip it a quarter. It's crazy, right? 22,000 people signed up. Okay, now, he didn't actually flip a coin. He had a computer generate it, and they would send in the question they were trying to answer, and he would send them back, yes or no. Yes means do it, take the risk. No is saying stay, don't do it, okay? Half and half. Now, normally, just for your information, when you have those decisions, normally 75% of the time you say no. And a lot of that's because you just don't make the hard decision, and if you don't make it, it turns into no through time. Okay, so he made it 50-50 yeses and nos. So it's a kind of a good experiment, kind of like a drug test, as a matter of fact. Treatment and control, random assignment, and he sends it back. Now here's where it gets interesting. He asked everybody in this study how happy they were before the decision. 1 is abject misery, 10 is total bliss. They make the decision and he follows up a year later. What does he find? The yeses are an entire digit on average happier than the nos. What does this mean? We tend to say no, but yes makes us happier. We say yes too little. We're too risk averse. We don't take enough risks in the big adventures of life. Again, this is empirical evidence of this proposition. This is not just me kind of coming up with a hypothesis about it. That's why this paper is so brilliant. I started thinking about it, and it started affecting the way that I see things. So for example, I have people all around me. I have a lot of young people who work for me at AEI. We have a staff of about 275 people at AEI. It's a big place. And it's a kind of a barbell shape, where there are a bunch of older people like me, but there are a lot of young people in their 30s who are working there. And I get to know them. Some of the young guys get to know them pretty well, and I'll say, so how's it going? Are you still seeing that girl? Yeah. How long have you been dating? And Washington, D.C. is the most dysfunctional dating market in America. How long have you been dating that girl? It'll be like 8 years or something, right? Do you love her? Yeah. They'll sometimes ask me, what do you think I should do? Say, I know what you should do, because I have the data, right? What you should do is you should go home and put on your favorite music and listen for an hour, and then go over to her place and get down on one knee. Say yes, and hope she says yes too. The data say you'll be happier. Take the step. Okay, but that's advice for all of us. Now back to the prison entrepreneurship program. I'm going to relate this back to a minute ago. I thought they took too much risk. It turns out they took the wrong risk. For them, robbing a liquor store was scarier than marrying the woman who had your children. It turned out that going to jail was less scary than raising your children. That going to jail was actually less scarier than going to a job every single day, because they hadn't gotten used to saying yes to the life in life. Great entrepreneurs, great life entrepreneurs are specialists in the art of yes. Now, I think about that to myself, and I think, what am I saying no to? What am I just putting off? What am I worried? What kind of decision am I worried about taking? It's revolutionized my thinking, as a matter of fact, and it can you too. Because when I talk to those guys in PEP now, they say, you want to know why I'm happy now? Because I moved in with my girlfriend and married her. And I was afraid to do that. And it's the best thing I ever did. Because they said yes, they took the risk. How can you learn from the guys who are in prison and say yes to that thing in your life? That's practice number 1 at the start of life. Practice number 2.
They'll still find you.
Practice number 2 at the start of life. Use your weaknesses to connect with others as a source of strength. You were taught in school, and you learned from your mother, that you should always figure out what you're good at and focus on that for the rest of your life. Right? There's a wonderful tool, the Gallup polling organization in Washington, D.C. They run, it's in Omaha in Washington, and their most profitable product is a thing called the Strengths Finder. And the Strengths Finder is a thing you answer a battery of questions. And big companies will get it, and they'll put it in front of all of their employees. And each person will answer a couple hundred questions, and they'll correlate all the responses and say, here's what you're good at, here's what you're bad at, focus what you're good at. And so CEOs will give it to all their employees and reassign everybody's jobs, that sort of thing. I recommend going and looking at it, because you'll learn something about your strengths that you didn't know before. And you say, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense, right? The point is, Strengths Finder helps you focus on your strengths. You've heard your whole life you should focus on your strengths and you should marginalize your weaknesses. The guys in the prison entrepreneurship program helped me to realize that focusing on your strengths is not the only way to succeed. Focusing on your weaknesses actually will make you succeed as well. Now what do I mean by that? Because that's kind of a tricky thing. When you talk to successful commercial entrepreneurs, people who made it big, people who made a lot of money, and you ask them about their story of success, ordinarily, which as I told you before, I do it all the time, ordinarily they'll tell you about their failures. They won't say, oh, and then, I made $1 billion, and then I made another $1 billion. No, they'll tell you about the early days. One of my donors is a guy who started Home Depot named Bernie Marcus. And when you ask him his story about founding Home Depot, he talks about, they opened this hardware store on Peachtree Street in Atlanta, and nobody would go in. And they were taking money of their kids' college accounts, and they were taking out second mortgages on the house. And they had to send their kids out to wave $1 bills out on Peachtree Street and give them to people just to go in, just to look inside their store. He said his wife wouldn't let him shave alone with a razor blade. And it was just terrible, right? But entrepreneurs always tell you these stories of hardship. Why? Because in their weaknesses and in their failures, you see the seeds of their success. That's actually something that people can relate to and is valuable to them. Your weakness is valuable to you, and it connects you to other people. This is what you find with the prison entrepreneurship program guys too. Remember, they're very forthcoming about their weaknesses. You'll ask them, what did you do? Or even more importantly, when the guys get out and say, what gives you the most satisfaction? And telling the guys not to get their girlfriends pregnant, and if they do, to run out on them, because they'll end up, their lives all messed up. Or if you take drugs, you go to prison like I do. In other words, sharing the stories of their failures and weaknesses gives them the most satisfaction because it connects them deeply to other people. That's really important. I was talking to a guy, and I remembered this as I was going through this. It was actually somebody I knew a long time ago, and he was telling me the story of his life, and he said, he grew up in a rich family, a publishing family. So his father was, had hundreds of millions of dollars, famous guy. And this guy, his friend of mine, his son, he was sort of a wastrel. Kind of goofed around and couldn't find his way, partied a lot. Went to college, got terrible grades, didn't know what he wanted to do. Just, had a car from his dad. And he said he was in his senior year in college. He was at a party, 3 o'clock in the morning, drunk, blind drunk, gets in his car, driving home, runs over a pedestrian and kills him. That's you. Which do you want to be, the driver or the pedestrian? It's actually not clear which you want to be, right? I mean, it's like your life is over. So, it's investigated, the police come, he has to pay some price. It was involuntary, but he had to go to prison for 6 months, went to jail for 6 months. And he said he had time to think about it. Now, he could have swept it under the rug and come out and worked for his dad, never mentioned it another day in his life. He decided that he was going to turn that tragedy into something meaningful for others. He thought that God wanted him to use that to lift other people up. He came out, got his master's degree in social work, and became a drug and alcohol counselor. And that was what he was doing when I met him. One of the richest families in America. Why is he a drug and alcohol counselor? Because he turned his weakness, his catastrophic failure, into a way to serve other people. I said, wow, that's really amazing. He said, well, you can do it too. And I said, I've, never been a drunk and run anybody over. And he said, it doesn't matter. He said, you're hiding something. He said, you're hiding something too. He said, what are you ashamed of? What are you embarrassed about? Is there something? And there is. And I'm going to tell you about it. Because it turns out, in my life, my greatest weakness connected me to others too. See, I had this funny job. I was a college professor, and I'm the head of a think tank, and I have hundreds of people who work for me who have PhDs and these huge brains and all that, but actually I have a terrible academic background. When I was 19, I dropped out of college. Dropped out, kicked out, split hairs. I went on the road as a musician because that was my dream, was to be a classical French horn player. Right? I mean, you heard the sanitary version of my bio. I was a failure. And I went on the road as a French horn player, and that was actually what I wanted to do anyway, and it was fun, and it was good, and I didn't make any money and all that. But in my late 20s, I thought, I want to learn something. It always bugged me. I mean, I have nothing against not going to college. My wife didn't go to college. I have a lot of friends who didn't go to college. I got nothing against it, but it bugged me that I failed. So I said, you know what? I'm going to try to go back. But I had no money, and I had really no live any place. So I had this friend, he said, there's a solution. What is it? Correspondence school. Really? How do you do it? Well, you sign up and you study from any place and you kind of mail in your exams, and after a while, if you do enough classes, to give you a bachelor's degree. I said, well, groovy. And so I looked on, I wasn't online in those days, I got a book, and I found this place, this correspondence education place called Thomas Edison State College in Trenton, New Jersey. And I signed up, and I started taking classes. And you know what? I got straight A's in correspondence school. I killed it in correspondence school. I was a really good student, it turned out. And I majored in economics, which completely captured my imagination. And I finished my bachelor's degree in 2.5 years. I was cranking through it and I was loving it and the whole thing. I never set foot in the classroom. I mean, it was, I never met a professor. I never met another student. It was just me and my wife, and I was sitting at the dining room table with a stack of books, and I finished my bachelor's degree. Okay, and I was so turned on by this, I wanted to know what the next thing to do was, but I didn't know anybody even to ask, what would you do? I only hung out with a bunch of, musicians, and they had no idea I was even doing this. So I wrote a letter to one of my correspondence professors, one of my economics mail order professor guys, who lived in Colorado, I think, and I said, what do I do next? And he wrote back and he said, you've done the best of any of my students that are in these classes. I think you should go get a PhD in economics. Like, crazy. I mean, that's crazy talk. And so I wrote back to him, I said, where should I do it? And he said, I think you should apply to Harvard. And I'm sure you can get in. And I was filled with confidence. I mean, confidence I never had my whole life. And I wasn't a good student, and I screwed up and dropped out and got kicked out, the whole thing. But for the first time, somebody believed in me. And so, I said to my wife, Esther, I said, honey, I'm gonna do it. And so I wrote and I got their packet and I filled out their application with love and with affection, and I got my recommendation letters and I wrote my essays and I sent it in, and I got rejected in 2 days. And because it turns out that Harvard is not in the market for a 30-year-old, at this point, French horn playing, correspondence degree college dropout. That's not their core demo that they're looking for, it turns out. And it was very depressing, as a matter of fact. It was discouraging. But I didn't know anything about this, so I said to my wife, honey, I'm gonna call them up and see how close I came, just for information. And she says, you're an idiot. That's not a normal thing to do, but I said, I just gotta know. So I called up the admissions office at the College of Arts and Sciences at Harvard University, and this nice lady answers, and I said, I just got rejected from your PhD program in economics. She said, I'm so sorry. I said, no. It's fine. I just want to know how close I came how close did I come for my information? She said, all right. So she puts down the phone, and I hear her rustling around and opening and closing filing cabinets. And she comes back 2 minutes later and she says, not close. And then I'm like bargaining. Was I in the top half? And she says, no. And it was terrible. So, all right. So I went to the next level and got rejected, and the next level and got rejected. And finally I found a graduate school that wasn't paying close attention, and they let me in. And I never told anybody about that. When you're in a PhD program and all the other guys went to Harvard, right? They say, where'd you do your undergraduate? And I would say, the University. And I just changed the subject, kind of. And then I finished and I went into academia. And I taught at Syracuse University, which for public policy is the #1 school in the country. And this is high-class stuff. And people would ask, where'd you do your undergraduate? And I would change the subject. I never lied. And my vita was public. And it says Thomas Edison State College on it, which sounds legit. So nobody ever asked. And I just didn't bring it up. And then in 2008, the American Enterprise Institute, the best think tank, national think tank in Washington, D.C., calls me up and said, you want to be president? And I said, yeah, and I still never told anybody about this. So I came to AEI, and not mentioning it, because here was my big fear, my paranoid fantasy, was the Washington Post was going to get a hold of this piece of information. They're going to write a story saying, right-wing national think tank is run by a hack with a correspondence school bachelor's degree, right? And it was going to be embarrassing to my donors and to my colleagues, and it was going to be horrible. And I was living in fear, right? I didn't say anything. Now, I hire a guy, a year or so after I come to AEI, who's an economist in the markets of higher education, right? He's a scholar. This guy's got a platinum resume. He went to Dartmouth and he did his PhD at Berkeley. He's the guy I always wanted to be. And his name is Andrew Kelly. He's a great scholar. And I bring him in, and we have complete academic freedom. I don't tell anybody what they're going to do work on. We're like the best universities. We're like a university, but where all the professors love America. By the way, I'm speaking at Brown today at 5:30. And I really need you there. So if you can come at 5:30, please come at 5:30. And anyway, so this guy, you know, I don't tell him what to write. So Andrew Kelly comes into my office on his first day, and I said, Andrew, you know, I know he's going to write about higher ed's too expensive, and there's too much debt, and people don't finish, and they hate conservative viewpoints, and it's a problem, right? There's so much to write about. I said, Andrew, what's your first research project going to be on? He said, I've always wanted to do an expose on fly-by-night correspondence schools. So I'm sunk, you know, but I don't say anything. I'm kind of being cool, right? Because maybe nothing happens. Maybe he doesn't figure it out. And a month later, I get an email from him in the middle of the night, and he says, Andrew says, hey Arthur, I'm on the Wikipedia site for a place called Thomas Edison State College, and you're not going to believe it. They're claiming you're an alum. So dude, you got to get that cleared up. Okay, so the jig is up, and I think, what do? I discussed it with my wife, and she says, go big or go home, man. Why don't you write about it for the New York Times? So I did. I wrote a piece called My Cheap, Valuable College Degree, in which I explained that I got my college degree, including all the courses and all the books, for 10 grand in today's dollars. And that included the sticker for my car, which I didn't put on my car because I was embarrassed. Right? And if it hadn't been for that cheap, valuable college degree, I would not have gotten my PhD, and I would not have gotten a job teaching at a university, and I would not be the president of the American Enterprise Institute. I needed that degree. I needed that step up. I needed the American dream. And that's how I got it. Okay, gotta brace myself. Hack, patsy, loser. It's not what I got. I got hundreds of emails from strangers saying, I did that too. Thank you for writing that essay. Americans, right? This one lady, she writes to me, she says, you know, my son, he's 31 years old, and he dropped out of college 10 years ago, and he's really been struggling. And I showed him your article, and I think he's gonna sign up at Thomas Edison State College. Thank you for giving my son a second chance. And here's the ironic thing, my friends. I have dedicated my career to equal opportunity. I am a warrior for opportunities for people at the periphery of society. I will take no prisoners in that war because everybody deserves the radical equality of human dignity and the experience that comes from the promise of this country, right? And yet, there's one thing that was connecting me to the people at the margins of society. One thing, which was my background, my educational opportunity, which was decimated and in ashes, and then rose from the ashes because of this thing. And I never told anybody about it because I was embarrassed about it. How ironic that I would dedicate myself to equal opportunity and then not talk about the connection that I have to people who need equal opportunity the most. Now, I'm no hero. I only talked about it in public because I got outed by a scholar. I would probably still be hiding it today if it hadn't been for that. But it changed my life. It changed my work, it changed my outlook, it made it possible for me to talk to audiences I've never met before, and it made me proud of the fact, actually proud of the fact, that despite the mistakes that I made and the wrong turns that I made, that I was able to resurrect that on the basis of hard work and the love and opportunity that were given to me by other people. We need more of that. And how do we get it? Through the examples that come from all of you. I look around this room and I see prosperous, successful, famous people. Right? But every one of you has a weakness. Every one of you has something you're embarrassed about. Something that's a weak point in your resume. Something that's a little bit dubious in your past. That's your strength. You want to lift people up at the margins? Use that to connect to other people. That's what I learned from the Prison Entrepreneurship Program. And that's what I learned in my life too. And that's your opportunity as well. Last part of the story, and I'm going to turn it over to you. So I didn't finish the story about Thomas Edison. When I wrote that piece in the New York Times, one of the calls that I got was from the president of Thomas Edison State College. And he said, I read your piece. I had no idea. I'd like you to accept an honorary doctorate and be the speaker in our commencement. 2013. And so what's this commencement for a correspondence school, right? Is it like 8 guys in a conference room? So I go up into Trenton, and it's at the Trenton Ice Rink, which is the home of the defunct hockey team, right? And there are 5,000 people there, cheering, and hundreds of people crossing the stage, getting their degrees. And I'm there in my cap and gown. I borrowed my cap and gown from my dad. My dad was a college professor. And I was sitting there, and I was listening to these people, because they were, they were all first-generation college graduates, unlike me. They were, a third of them were active military. And you could tell they lived these lives. And they got to say their name and one thing, because that's all they had time for. Hundreds of people crossing the stage. Name and one thing. And I remember this one lady, this really sticks in my mind. This one lady, at the very end, she stops and she says, you know, for this moment, she was 45, she had lines on her face, she'd really lived. She said, you know, for this moment, I just want to thank my 5 children and the Son of the living God. And I thought, you know what? That is the start of life. That's an American hero. That's what this country is based on. Look, I love the rich guys. I would love to be one. But that lady actually exemplifies why we fight. Why this center actually does its work. Why you give your money to the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity. Because we want more like that lady. We want more opportunities to be like her. If we can do that together, we can learn the secrets of the true startup life. If we can talk about it in a winsome way, if we can help people understand what's written on our heart is that and not the money, we can win this war for the hearts and minds of Americans to bring them back to the true promise of what this country is supposed to be all about. That starts with you. That starts with the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity. And for that, and for the work that you're doing right here, that's filtering up to Washington, D.C., all I can say is God bless you for that. And thank you.
It's all yours. Who wants to ask a question? Rep. Giarrusso.
I love the idea about the prison entrepreneurial thing. Was that privately funded or was it public funded?
Yeah, so the Prison Entrepreneurship Program in Texas, there's a bunch of them around the country, and some of them have public funding, and a lot of them have private funding. This particular one is run by a guy named Bert Smith, who's a very successful businessman. He's got 500 businessmen that do it with him. They're men because it's in men's prisons, and so there's security issues going on with that. It's all completely funded. It's actually got a low budget because most of the people are given their time. And they're very strong Christian men that are doing this thing, and they put in a little bit of their money as well. So I think their budget's probably about $2 million a year, but they have a huge core, hundreds of people that are going into the prisons. So if you look up the Prison Entrepreneurship Program in Texas, they're part of a network that do a lot of the same thing, and they have all different sources of funding. And I recommend it very strongly to you for your interest.
Thank you.
You'll love it. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah.
This is a lightweight question.
It's okay. I'll give a lightweight answer.
Given the media, television, books, and things that we see that influence us every day, could you give us your honest opinion of a program on TV like the Shark Tank that seems to be getting entrepreneurs or at least startup people off the ground?
So Shark Tank is actually a good example of that because what it's doing is celebrating entrepreneurship. Anything that actually has a positive vision of the entrepreneurial life is really important. Aside from that, I don't know, I mean, the key thing, I don't actually watch television very much. We cut the cord, I don't even have cable anymore. And it's just because I didn't watch it. But there are a lot of things that you can look at in media, really very, very inspiring things in the podcast world, which is a lot of young people are getting their media that way, about entrepreneurship, about up from the bottom kinds of stories. And they're useful, actually. So if you do just a little bit of research on that, you can find those things. It's also worth pointing out that in media, we don't have enough people that are getting behind projects that are specifically trying to create aspirational content along these lines, which is why we're doing the movie that I talked to you about. It's coming out we'll probably submit it to film festivals in the fall, and then it'll be on Netflix or wherever in the spring of 19. It's because we wanted something that people will consume and it'll say, wow, that just makes me feel really good. It makes me feel like I can relate to it. It's an inspiration to the way that I want to live my life. And so there's more content along these lines, just a question of digging through it a little bit and publicizing it the right way. Think tanks are really good at doing this, as a matter of fact. And that's the communications arm of what we do at AEI.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to take prerogative and ask the next question.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of lawmakers in the room. We have a lot of civil advocates who have the ear of lawmakers. So two-part question. What can we do as a government to encourage that life entrepreneurship, and what can civil society leaders do, whether it's in their parishes, their business communities, their local communities? What can we do practically to encourage what you talked about?
Okay, so the answer to what can we do practically to encourage a culture that allows people to see the limitlessness of their potential. What can we do? The answer to that is literally what I'm going to talk about at Brown University tonight, is my answer. And it's not just how do you lift people up, it's how you bring the country together. The only way that this country is going to come together, it's horribly polarized right now. I don't tell anybody in this room right now how awful, how unproductive the conversations are. I mean, some of your politicians, it's tough, right? It's tough. Particularly if you have a strong point of view, you're going to be vilified, and you're going to be encouraged to vilify others. How do we get past that? We do that by bringing people together around the American experience of mobility. That's what really always brings people together, is service to our fellow men and women who are at the margins. That's the only thing that's ever brought this country together, as a matter of fact. Okay, so how do you do it? Let me give you one quick idea that I'm going to focus on tonight. Okay, now, when we talk about people at the margins of society today, in modern America today, we're talking about charity cases. We're talking about people that can't make their own way. You know how we talk about them? We talk about them like liabilities to manage, right? That's terrible, right? We've taken a completely wrong turn in the way that we talk about people at the margins of society, right? Would you talk about your kid? I mean, I have 3 teenage kids. I'm not here to tell you my problems, but but you know, sometimes, you know, in my worst moments, my wife and I call them the undeserving poor, right? They're teenagers, right? They're not very thankful. They feel sort of entitled and all that. But would I treat them like liabilities? Would I treat them like charity cases? No. I invest in them as assets to develop. This is the new way of thinking. If we want to come together around a big economy of despair in the United States today, is we have to stop helping people at the margins, and we have to start needing people at the margins. All policy should ask, what am I going to do today to make people more necessary? Not more maintained, not more helped, but more necessary. You know what everybody wants? They want to be needed. Everybody wants that. If you don't feel needed, you don't feel dignity. If you don't feel dignity, you're going to be stagnant and mediocre and unhappy and frustrated. Guaranteed. Like, I got all the social science research, but you don't even need it. The key thing that we need to start thinking about differently. That's the reason that welfare should always have work attached. Not because you want to punish people with jobs, but because you need people to be needed and to feel that necessity. That's the only way that they can become mobile for the first time. So that's the key point. That's the key takeaway, is not help, moving from help to need. And that's the essence of my talk at Brown tonight, is exactly how do we do it, and morally, what does it mean when we do that for the first time?
Brett Williams.
Thank you. I'm going to try my best not to confuse anybody with my Spanish. But thank you very much, because I'm leaving here with a lot of ammunition. As some of you know, I am a very outspoken person. I say it like it is. Unfortunately, some people don't like that. My question to you is, how is it that we can, in fact, you know, because Rhode Island perception is some people's reality. How is it that with your presentation today, we can convince, and when I say we, poor people, people of color, can convince that what may have been presented is not the fact, because people tend to believe what they hear or what they're told, opposed to finding or asking what the truth is, what is the fact. So before assuming, get the facts, but many folks are not doing that. They're taking what's presented, and they too are planting those seeds along the way and making the situations worse than it actually is.
So give me
how
an
can-
example, a very tangible example of people not getting the facts and going with something that's not true because of what they've heard or seen in the media.
Okay, hair braiding, natural hair braiding. As you mentioned, some folks were brought over here to America
Right.
against their will. And they had to learn how to survive. One of the things that they had to do with their natural hair for hygiene purposes was to plait it so that, you know, they weren't afforded many conveniences while they were picking the cotton and doing all of the other types of work. So by virtue of that, they passed on that habit to each other, teaching, well, this is a way you can become sanitary, be sanitary, how you do this stuff. And it became a way of life, part of their everyday. Through all the years, 2018, that has been a gift, has been a way of life for many African American individuals and beyond to braid. Now it's a style, now it's common, now it's the thing. And government wants to say, you know what? We can tax that
Right.
and oppress these individuals. It's like a punishment. So the information that's being put out there is that it's causing disease, it's causing hardship, it's causing medical, problems by allowing these individuals to continue to braid these natural hair. So perception is a reality because there are individuals who have heard what's been presented, what's been unfortunately, unfairly presented, and they believe it. They do not want to believe that it's natural. There is absolutely no chemicals or anything to
Yep.
complete this.
So let me address that specifically. So I live in Washington DC, and in Washington DC this year, if you want to get a residential real estate sales license, okay, which is a typical second career for middle-class women when their kids grow up. It's a very typical thing. It takes you about 6 weeks, and it costs about $1,000 to get the training. Is that a lot or little? You decide. Now let's say you want to do African hair braiding, okay, which is a typical first job for single women with little kids in the home. Single moms with little kids in the home in marginalized parts of Washington, D.C. To do that, you need a license, just like a realtor, but the license requires 46 weeks of education, and it costs $16,000.
Oh my God.
To get it. That, my friends, is discrimination against
Same in
poor
Rhode
people.
Island, same in Rhode Island.
Yeah. I mean, this is the same almost all over the country. There's some places like the Institute for Justice brought a case for hair braiding against the Cosmetology Association, which is a cartel making it impossible for people to break in Utah. And what? And then you can braid hair with no caustic chemicals, nothing. I mean, it's super safe, and basically it's a way to keep poor people out of markets, right? So that's the key thing. And by the way, it's not government that's doing it. Government will allow this to happen. The problem are crony capitalists. They're organizations, they're trade organizations that represent people who are already in an industry trying to keep other people out of the industry to get rid of competition. Two kinds of people in the world. You want to win competition, you want to shut it down. There's only two kinds of people in any kind of competition. And people that are dedicated to shutting down competition and hurting poor people are really villainous in our society. How do you fix that? You publicize that. You don't think everybody in America is sympathetic to the people who are poor and are just trying to run a business and are trying to braid hair, for Pete's sake. This is especially important for conservatives to do. Conservative people need to go to the parts of our cities and the parts of our societies where conservatives typically don't go and don't feel welcome. and find the people who need to be lifted up and make allies of those people by making their cases public. We need to go in Washington, D.C. to Anacostia and show cases of women who can't make their living because they can't afford to stop taking care of their kids and working for 46 weeks and spend $16,000.
But what happens here in Rhode Island is one, you're blackballed, and those who have the financial means to do as you're saying to do are afraid that their counterparts are going to also, keep them at bay.
Right.
That is happening, and it's a reality.
Sure, absolutely, and that's why organizations like this one and mine and any other organization of people who are dedicated to the principles of freedom, free people, prosperity, actually need to make the case directly to the American people, and we need more public interest law firms that are taking suits to the cartels. You need two things. You need a communications effort, and you need a legal effort on this to break down these, again, if we don't do it, who's going to pay? Poor people. And they're going to be unseen and unheard, and they're just simply going to stay poor. And they don't want to be poor, because nobody wants to be poor. There's no nobility in that. So that's actually the two things that we need to do. And we need great organizations that are dedicated to those two branches of making sure that these causes are litigated and these causes are well known in the public sphere.
Let me just
God
follow
bless
up
you
on
for
that. 2 weeks from tomorrow or Thursday, I haven't picked the day, there's going to be a hair break. They're calling themselves Freedom Braiders, great name. They're going to be assembling at the State House the 24th or the 25th. Institute for Justice is helping us. In fact, the speaker from the Institute for Justice, I can't think of his name offhand, but he's a guy who has actually helped instigate some of those lawsuits in other states. So we will have the communications piece, and we're going to be investigating the legal piece.
Good stuff.
Next question, Joe, did you have a question? Pass. Pass. Question, yes, Ted.
Thanks for your time. Wonderful story. Loved hearing your higher education story. In Rhode Island, we have a lot of strengths, a few weaknesses. One of our big challenges in Rhode Island are public schools and public education. It might be a little bit out of your lane, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on public education versus school choice versus charter schools.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
We have 14 full-time researchers working on this at AEI. We have a lot of work going on this. And a lot of it is exactly what you do here with respect to school choice. So there's traditional choice, which is vouchers and sort of demand side choice, and there's charters, which is related to it. And both of those things are really, really good. And we're going to keep doing that, and I urge you to keep doing work on this, because this is one of the great civil rights struggles of our time, is the idea that we systematically marginalize the bottom 25% of the income distribution by giving them substandard education, such that something like a quarter of Americans today will not have the skills to earn any wage at any market wage in any industry when they finish. That is the guarantee that we're going to pull 25% of the country in the cart. Which, by the way, we're super rich, we can afford to do it. We shouldn't do it because it takes people's dignity away. It's a moral problem, not an economic problem, primarily. Okay, so that's one key thing. I urge you to keep doing that. Here's another lane I'm asking everybody to start thinking about. When I look at the economy of despair around this country, particularly in rural areas, but urban areas as well, the problem is largely a mismatch of jobs and skills. You find the lowest level of labor participation, the lowest level of employment, at the same time that we have the lowest level of unemployment. How is it possible that we have 7 million unfilled jobs in this country, at the same time that we have the largest number of men who are of working age and able-bodied who are not in the workforce? How can you have those two things simultaneously? And the answer is, these guys have no skills. So when we go to little towns in Kentucky and West Virginia that have a lot of opioid problems, just like Rhode Island, by the way, it's a big opioid crisis here in this state as well. But when you talk to guys who are hanging around, I was at a town called Inez, Kentucky, in central Kentucky, in Martin County, Kentucky, and 29% of the adults are in the workforce. 40% of the adults are on welfare, right? And you ask people, I mean, it's crazy. It's like, I understand that Kentucky doesn't have very many jobs, I got it. Go to North Dakota, 2.3% unemployment. They say, and do what? I have no skills. Okay, that's a good point. One of those 7 million unfilled jobs, you know what they are? They're blue collar jobs. When we talk about the net immigration to the United States, the net immigration is largely actually skilled at this point. People are literally sneaking into the United States with welding skills. Why? Because if you run a construction site in America today, you can't find welders. And that creates an incentive for illegal immigration. I got it. And God bless them that they want to work. I mean, I completely got it. But that's an opportunity for America. How is it? How is it? You go into these towns and these guys don't have any skills. When we have, literally today, there are 300,000 unfilled skilled welding jobs in America. This very day, right? That's it. You know what those jobs pay? 58 grand a year to start. Good money. And it doesn't take 100 years to get these skills. So this is what school reform should really be all about. Shop class, trade school, apprenticeships. That's what we need to work on. Rhode Island should lead the way. Should lead the way for America on that.
Right here, right.
So,
Absolutely.
I agree 100% with what we just talked about. We have a governor and one before, they spend money on some corporation in Minnesota every chance they get. I own part of a little corporation that was bought out by a big corporation. I wish I owned
The big
percentage
corporation.
now. Anyway, 200 jobs that the state helped them with. 182 of those people came from elsewhere. That's how they spend our money. That's how Governor Wilanto spends our money. So, the people in trouble, who I see every day, are never going to get a job at Johnson & Johnson. Ever. I'm angry about it. Because, say a fourth of us need a job and we need some training. And the state policy is for upper, middle class, and upper class jobs. And, you understand my point?
I totally understand the point. Here.
So let me give you a second.
Yeah.
These are the same. 75% of all our free housing money from HUD and elsewhere goes to developers to take old mills, sometimes kick the mill owner out, but not the mill owner, but the person running the factory, kick them out and put in middle, upper class housing. 75% of our housing money.
Wow.
And in downtown Providence, 75% of those people are not Rhode Islanders. So I am subsidizing, I could name you 5 developers. We are subsidizing them to bring, and this gets to racial too, 98% of people are white, 75% come from elsewhere, and it's our housing dollars. And there's not a dime to help somebody with triple decker. So could you respond to both of those? I am so angry about all this elitism.
Yeah.
And generally I'm part of Democrats, but.
I'm just gonna say, you're a Republican?
No,
Yes.
they're all the same.
We have a forum.
You put, I'm gonna finish my question in a second. But you put them in office and the next thing you know, they're working with the rich against the middle class and the poor, which hurts us all.
Yeah. So, okay, so the two things, let's pull the two things apart. Number one is really bad policies. We got a lot of policymakers in here. This is something that needs to be addressed. Is when you're actually creating incentives, when you're using state money to creates incentives that marginalize the people who need the help the most in the state. That's bad policy design. Okay. So, but here's a sociological question that I can address more directly, which is one of elitism. Classism. It's the most amazing thing. Over my adult lifetime, we've actually gone to this college for all mentality. And we've gone to the skills that are fancy, the skills that are acceptable. Well, no. Look, a job is a job. There's this guy I was sitting next to years ago. This is how I learned this. Guy I was sitting next to on a plane. And I sat down next to him. I had like a 2-hour flight. He starts talking to me, which was a big mistake on his part. And because if you sit next to me on a plane, I don't know you. I'm gonna start asking you what you do for a living immediately. Because I'm super interested in people's jobs. I want to know what do you do all day, what time you get in, you work on the weekends. I want to know. I want to know because jobs are very interesting to me. So I start asking the guy. Turns out he's the CFO of a company that owns 750 Burger Kings. Right, and I started asking him about the supply chain for Burger Kings, where they get their ingredients and how their labor markets work. And I asked him, "You ever feel like you're creating a lot of dead-end jobs?" And I knew it was a mistake because his face starts turning red, right? And I started backing up. I said, I'm sorry. He says, look, don't apologize. I hear it all the time. But let me tell you, there's no dead-end jobs. The problem that we have is not that people can't make a living at Burger King, it's that they don't stay around, or they show up stoned, or they fight, or they steal, or they cash out their first paycheck and they don't come back, right? But if we actually celebrated work as work, and by the way, there's a bunch of policies that we can actually implement immediately that makes work pay, that are not stupid policies like the minimum wage, which shaves off the bottom rungs of the ladder. But they're good, they're motivated in the same way of trying to make low work pay, like the expansion of the earned income tax credit and wage subsidies. Tons of good policies that do this, as a matter of fact. But we have to celebrate all work, because all work has equal dignity, and all skills are good, and everybody starts someplace. But when we go to the middle class, and we're looking at college level teaching and middle class skills, and we only want to bring people into our communities who are middle class and above, we're classists. It's un-American, as a matter of fact. The community should be one that celebrates people who are on their way up, no matter where they start, and where we're not so materialistic as to say, if you're not middle class or above, we don't like you. And so that takes a cultural shift. You know what? Actually, that starts at the top. You need executives, you need political executives, President of the United States, governor of the state, who actually comes right out and says that. Who says it's not right the way we treat people with lower skill. It's not right the way we talk about people who don't have college educations. It's okay if you didn't go to Harvard. It's okay if you didn't go to the community college. Everybody needs more skill, and thank God you want to actually support your family. We want to help you as you support your family. But we need to break down these cultural barriers to equality and radical solidarity between brothers and sisters in this country, and we're not doing it right now.
Thank you. Stu Clark, we promise he needs to get to ground. Thank you.